your families. Okay, so just wanted to allocate like 1 or 2 minutes maybe for any questions from the last session. If you have any questions or if you want to share something, you can use this time. Or if you want to say something, how your preparation is going on, anything is okay. Okay, if not, everything is fine. We'll get started for today's discussion. So, in the last class, we were discussing about Gandhi, the advent of Gandhi, and how it is going to change the political landscape of the country. So, before the advent of Gandhi, uh, before 1915, a lot of events were taking place in India, but almost all the events are against the British, but at the same time, they are not coordinated. And mostly one section is fighting against the British. Maybe it is like the peasants fighting against the British, tribals against the British, landlords or zamindars against the British, or the businessmen against the British. So it is like each and every group having its own individual battle. And also there was no mass movement before the advent of Gandhi. Now after Gandhi coming into the politics at the national level, we can see that the common man also participated into the freedom struggle. Now this is one of the major achievements of Gandhian freedom struggle. And moreover, this the events or the movements which are undertaken by Gandhi were mostly non-violent and peaceful in their approach, except for some isolated incidents here and there that we are going to discuss in detail when we are talking about the non-cooperation movement and Quit India movement. Okay, so I hope everyone is clear about the previous class, the Gandhian idea, the Gandhian ideology, and how it is different from that of other ideologies. So this is like a very frequently asked question and also the most expected of the questions. Gandhian idea of Swaraj, Gandhian idea of Satyagraha, Gandhian idea of religion, and how the Gandhi's nationalism is different from Nehru's nationalism. Okay, or maybe Gandhi's socialism is different from Nehru's socialism. Now, these kind of questions not only asked in your history paper, but also in your polity paper, maybe in your GS2, you have directive principles of state policy. In directive principles of state policy, there is part 4 of the constitution, which will talk about the Gandhian principles. So, if you could recollect the directive principles of state policy from 36 to 51, and today we got 51 here, that is for fundamental duty. Now, 36 to 51, if you go through each of these, like uh, uh, the three fundamental directive principles of state policies, the three categories, it can be broadly divided into. One of those categories is the Gandhian movement. And also, we can see that Gandhian idea of state, the Gandhian idea of liberty, equality, and fraternity are all reflected in our fundamental rights. And most importantly, there is India's foreign policy, Article 51, okay, which is talking about the world view of India. Now, this is nothing which also talks about India want to be a peaceful power and looking for the peaceful prospects of the world. So, this is something which is going to give a lot of impact on various other events like India's foreign policy, Indian political ideology, all are shaped by Gandhian ideology. That is why we can see that Gandhi in multiple papers, multiple areas differently asked, the same questions are differently asked. Now, because this is a competitive examination, the questions can be bit difficult or bit twisted. It's not difficult, it's a bit twisted. So you should be in a position to answer those questions. Maybe they can give the different movements undertaken by Gandhi, Champaran, Kheda, Ahmedabad, arrange them in the chronological order. Okay, or they might give some leaders who are the leaders of these movements apart from Gandhi, who are the important leaders of these movements, and match the following. This kind of questions you can expect in prelims, they have already asked this kind of questions many a times. Okay, so now moving on to the next topic. Now, in the last class, we were discussing about how Gandhi's movements were uh, started in India and what is their success. Now, because of their huge success of Champaran, Ahmedabad, and Kheda, now Gandhi is going to take a much broader role that is at the national level. Till that point of time, Gandhi was playing an important role at the regional level, like Champaran, Ahmedabad, and Kheda are regional movements. Now, for the first time, he is going to undertake a movement that is called Rowlatt Satyagraha. Now, before getting into the Rowlatt Satyagraha, there are three issues which are very much interrelated. Rowlatt Satyagraha, then comes Jallianwala Bagh incident, and further comes the Khilafat movement. Now, all the three are very much interrelated, and all the three would become the causes for starting of non-cooperation movement. And in between these two, the first set of three events, that is Rowlatt, Jallianwala Bagh, and Khilafat movement. Now, these are the first set of the three issues, and further comes the non-cooperation movement. Now, between these two, there is one more important act which has been uh, given by the British government. That is what we call it as 1919 Government of India Act. If you can see the screen, I have given you here. Government of India Act 1919, also called as Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms. So today agenda will try to complete the three movements, and if time permits, we'll get into the Government of India Act 1919. We'll see the important features of this movement. Hope the agenda for today's class is clear. What are we going to discuss? Any questions till now? Okay, good. If not, like we'll start with the Rowlatt Satyagraha 1919. So if you want, you can write down few points, few important points about Rowlatt Satyagraha. Rowlatt, R-O-W-L-A-T-T, Rowlatt Satyagraha. Okay, the actual name of the Rowlatt Act. Okay, it is a set of acts. It is called as the Anarchical and Revolutionary Crimes Act of 1919. The Anarchical and Revolutionary Crimes Act of 1919. Now, these set of act are generally called as Rowlatt Act because it is based on the report of Justice Rowlatt Committee of 1918. So 1 year before there was a committee, and this committee has called for a few recommendations. I hope everyone knows or heard about Rowlatt Satyagraha. But majority of the students, when I ask what exactly is the provision in Rowlatt Act, now this is how the questions in the prelims or mains can be formulated. So they do not understand what exactly is the Rowlatt Act. Okay, first of all, we'll see what is Rowlatt Act. Now, you have to understand the context in which these acts were formulated. So, hope you all know that the World War I was going on during the advent of Gandhi Home Rule League, because the World War I was between 1914 and 1918. Now, during this time, a series of emergency laws were implemented across the world, which are under the British rule. Now, in India, they were called as Defence Act. So, even today, whenever we are having a war or war-like situation, we do have Article 352, which calls for national emergency. Now, under Article 352, the fundamental rights can also be suspended. Hope you all know that there is Article 358, 359, which talks about the suspension of fundamental rights. Okay, so almost all the articles in the Constitution can be suspended except for Article 20 and 21. Now, this is something which we know even in a democratic country, that too in the 21st century, we do have some kind of suspension of fundamental right. Now, this we are talking 1 year, 100 years before. So there was one act called as Defence of India Act 1915. Now, this is a wartime act. Now, during a time of war, it is not the normal police who will be taking the law and order. The law and order would be controlled by the army. That is the Defence of India Act 1915. Now, this was justified. The reason was the war was going on. So even in democratic countries during the wartime, the fundamental rights would be suspended. But after the war, everyone in the world, including India, expected that these acts would be repealed because the war is over. There is no requirement for these laws. So that is the reason a committee was set up to look into whether the Defense of India Act 1915, the provisions, are they really required for India or not? That is the purpose of Rowlatt Committee. Now, this Rowlatt Committee has recommended that it is required to have the Defense of India Act, the provisions which are there in Defense of India Act, even when the war is over. That means even when the war is over, in almost all the other colonies of the British Empire, the uh, defense laws would be repealed, but in India they will be continued. Now, this has caused a lot of anger among the freedom fighters because they felt that because India has no interest in World War I and it has fought on the behalf of British. Now, what British has claimed is we are fighting for democracy. But ironically, when the British is ruling India, they did not have any democratic thought in their approach. Now, this is something which has angered the freedom fighters. So that is why a huge amount of agitations have started. Now, what exactly is there in the Rowlatt Act? Okay, now Rowlatt Act, you can write down the provisions if you want. The first provision is setting up of special courts for specific offences. Now, these specific offences are terrorism or sedition. Okay, terrorism, again, it is very vaguely defined because even today the word terrorism is not defined clearly. For example, maybe in India the definition is different, in America the definition is different, in Saudi Arabia the definition is different. For example, even in today's world, the word who is a terrorist and who is not very clearly defined. For example, uh, if you take any terrorist organization like Islamic State or Al Qaeda, some countries still do not recognize them as terrorist organization. They are terrorist organization only if they are against the interest of that particular country. Okay, so in the similar way, even for today, for example, if you talk about democracy in Saudi Arabia, you are branded as a terrorist. Now, during the time of British, if you are talking about freedom or independence, he was branded, that particular person would be branded as a terrorist, and the Rowlatt Act would be imposed. And under this act, the second provision is the police can detain them up to 2 years without a trial. Okay, without a trial. Without a trial means he would not be taken before a magistrate. Now, uh, this is something which is undemocratic. The reason is if it is a trial, that means if a crime has been done, then there should be punishment. But this is calling for preventive detention. This is called preventive detention. Now, preventive detention means even before committing a crime, a person would be taken by the police and he would be kept under the detention, and that too for a period of 2 years. And here, what exactly happened was these laws, the Rowlatt laws, were never actually implemented. But the committee's report, which has created a lot of agitation across India, and Indians have said that we feel cheated by this government because on one hand we are fighting for democracy, we have sacrificed our men, we have sacrificed our economy for the war of Britain, and what we are getting in return is the Rowlatt Act. Now this is what which angered a lot of Indians and including Mahatma Gandhi. And Mahatma Gandhi has said that I am going to take up this satyagraha for the first time at the all India level. So that is what we were discussing, that Gandhi's satyagraha started in South Africa. First satyagraha of Gandhi in India was Champaran. First satyagraha of Gandhi at the all India level was Rowlatt Satyagraha. So on 6th April of 1919, Gandhi said that this is a all India strike day. Okay, this particular day would be a all India strike day under the leadership of Gandhi as well as Congress. Now, some of the other leaders who are associated with the Rowlatt Satyagraha were, if you want, you can make a note of them, the important leaders of Rowlatt Satyagraha. Asaf Ali, ASAF, Asaf Ali, and Mukhtar Ahmad Ansari. Asaf Ali and Mukhtar Ahmad Ansari, M.A. Ansari. Mukhtar Ahmad Ansari. Okay, so these are the two important leaders at Delhi who organized the Rowlatt Satyagraha. At Madras, it was organized under the leadership of C. Rajagopalachari. C. Rajagopalachari, we were discussing that he is going to become the first Governor General of the first Indian to become the Governor General. Okay, so this is what we were discussing in the previous classes. And Jinnah resigned from Muhammad Ali Jinnah resigned from Central Legislative Council. Muhammad Ali Jinnah resigned from Central Legislative Council against the protest of Rowlatt Act. Against the protest of Rowlatt Act. Okay. Now, this particular Satyagraha has started with a huge amount of thrust, which is given by the Gandhi, the top leadership of Congress, including Gandhi, Jinnah, as well as the other top important leaders of Congress at that point of time. And the Congress has popularized a slogan called as no appeal, no dalil, and no vakil. No appeal means there is no appeal in the higher court because there is no judicial trial or a magistrate trial which is there in this particular law. If a person is tried under this particular law, there is no appeal. No dalil means no evidence. There is no evidence which is required. Just because the police suspected that you are participating in anti-British activity, you can be taken behind the bars. You can be put behind the bars. And no vakil, that is, no lawyers are permitted. This is something which is completely against the true spirit of democracy, on which the World War I has been taken up. So World War I, as you know, that British has said that we are fighting for democracy of those countries. Now, this is something which is ironical. That is what the Congress wanted to popularize. No appeal, no dalil, and no vakil became the popular slogans of the Rowlatt Satyagraha. Now, this Rowlatt Satyagraha was going on from 6th April 1919, but within a week, that is on 13th April 1919, one incident would trigger. That incident is called as the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. Now, before going into the Jallianwala Bagh incident, I would like to ask you, do you know any preventive detention laws in India today? Can anyone name the preventive detention laws in India which are there in India today? Okay, you can put it in the chart if you want, or you can try to find out and make a list and send it as an assignment. What are the preventive detention laws in India today? And there is a lot of controversy because this is something compared to that of Rowlatt Act. The way the British colonial government is trying to suppress the freedom of the political leaders, in the same way the governments of the day, even today, they are trying to suppress the any feedback which is given by the activist or the opposition leaders or even the judiciary. Okay, try to find out what are the preventive detention laws which are there currently in India. Maybe you would have heard of POTA, TADA, okay, Terrorist Activities Disruption Act, POTA, TADA, and MISA, okay, Maintenance of Internal Security Act. Now, all the three acts were repealed because of their controversies, but still today there are other laws. Try to make a list of the other preventive detention laws which are there in India today. And what the Constitution talks about preventive detention, go through Article 22 of the Constitution, talking about arrest and detention. This would also give you a lot of idea what the Constitution says. Okay. Okay, hope the Rowlatt Satyagraha, what is the background of Rowlatt Act, is clear to you. If you have any questions, we can go on to the next one. Okay. Again, I'll take it as a no if there is no, if no one is saying. Let us move on to the next topic, that is the Jallianwala Bagh incident. Now, this Jallianwala Bagh incident would take place on 13th April 1919. So the dates are also important because 6th April the All India Hartal was observed, that is Rowlatt Satyagraha, and on 13th April the Jallianwala Bagh massacre would take place. Now, what exactly is a Jallianwala Bagh? Jallianwala Bagh is a place in Amritsar. Bagh means the garden. Okay, so it's a place in Amritsar. So on 13th April in Punjab there is a festival called Baisakhi. Okay, this is the New Year for the Sikh community. Now they were celebrating Baisakhi, but at the same time the Rowlatt Act said that the Indians are not permitted to hold any assembly or protests. Now this is something today we do have as a fundamental right. We have Article 19(1)(c), formation of assemblies, okay, so and cooperatives. Now this is a fundamental right today. But in those times, if you are even today, if you are holding any assembly, a group of people, you have to take the permission of the local authorities. But in those times, it was even much strict. Now, what they have said is uh, uh, something similar to what today we call it as 144, Section 144. So where the people gathering, everything was prohibited. Now that was done under the Rowlatt Act. That means if anyone caught violating those norms, they would be put behind the bars directly by the police. Now, because of this, there were a lot of protests. We were talking about protests in Madras, protests in Delhi, in almost all major cities in the country, anti-British demonstrations. Now, the British wanted to curtail all these anti-British activities with an iron hand. So, what it has said is the people are not permitted to come out and gather, and any anti-British demonstrations should not be held. And the popular leaders, including Gandhi, was arrested to prevent him from entering Punjab, and also the other leaders like Dr. Satyapal Malik, Dr. Saifuddin Kichlew, Kitchlew, Kichlew. Okay, so I given all the names, all the facts in your notes. Okay, you can have a look at the notes. Dr. Saifuddin Kichlew, Dr. Satyapal Malik were arrested and they were taken to a unknown place. So they were they do not know where they were taken. Their families were searching for them. Now, because of this reason, a agitation was held in Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar. So as I told, it is on 13th April 1919. This is on the beginning of the Sikh New Year, which is a holy day for the entire northern part of India, mainly in Punjab. Now, because of this, the people in Amritsar started protesting against the confinement of Satyapal and Saifuddin, the two popular leaders of those times. So the crowd had a lot of men, women, children who all are gathered in a small park. So that park is having the gates, only one or two gates, it was having the only one or two entry and exit points, and in between the park there was a well as well for the water. Now, when the meeting was going on, suddenly one army officer by the name General Reginald Edward Dyer, he came there without any notice. He asked for open fire on the unarmed crowds. Now, this is something which is ironical. That means the army surrounded the gathering. It's not even the police, it is the army general who surrounded it. And he has said that no person should be allowed to escape. And they started shooting mercilessly over these crowds. And the only point, as I told, there is only one exit point for this park, and that was blocked so that people could not escape. Now, as per the official records, there were at least 1,000 people who were injured and 379 people who died at the spot. Now, after this particular incident would show the most inhuman activities of the British. Now, this has shocked the entire nation. And the consequence of this, Gandhi, in protest to the Jallianwala Bagh incident, has said that I am going to call off this Rowlatt Satyagraha. And he has withdrawn the Rowlatt Satyagraha in anger, because of he wanted to stop any further violence. Okay, and there was a lot of pressure which was mounting on the British Empire to order an inquiry committee, because General Dyer would have been taking the orders from somewhere else. Maybe it is imperative to know from whom the orders he was taking. So for that reason, a committee has been organized. That committee is called as Hunter Committee. The official name of the Hunter Committee was called as Disorders Inquiry Committee, popularly called as Hunter Committee. Now, this Hunter Committee has concluded that General Dyer was, in fact, he has done something wrong, but he was just following the orders. Now, you can see here on the slide the incident of Jallianwala Bagh described. Now, this particular committee did not impose any disciplinary action on General Dyer, but it has only said that General Dyer should not be posted again in India. Now, what angered Indians most is the response of the cold response of the British rather than the act itself. Because maybe one person can commit a wrongful act, but the way the British has tackled this incident has angered the entire nation. In fact, General Dyer became a hero among the conservative groups back in Britain. In fact, the House of Lords also passed a comment that he has done a very brave act or a heroic act. This has further angered the Indians, and in fact, there was the movement of returning the awards given by the British. Gandhi gave his award called Kaiser-e-Hind Award, which he got when he arrived from South Africa, and Rabindranath Tagore gave back his knighthood, that is Sir, the name Sir. So they were returned. So this is something what we today call it as award wapsi, okay, giving back the awards. Now the response was mixed. Some people said that it was people were violating the law. That's why he has done this, which is justified. But at the same time, killing of innocent people who were unarmed, and that too including children and women, was never ever justified. Now this is what the Indians would say as one of the most a black days in the freedom struggle. Okay. So as I told, the Jallianwala Bagh incident has angered the entire nation, and the response of the British was also cold. And because of the cold response of the British, there was one person by the name Udham Singh. And Udham Singh, he wanted to take revenge on the Jallianwala Bagh incident. Now, the person who has ordered the crowd, Reginald Dyer, he was no longer, he passed away in between. There is one more governor of Punjab at that point of time. The governor name is also Dyer. He is Michael O. Dyer. Now, what Udham Singh has done, he went back to London after 21 years and he has shot Michael O. Dyer in a meeting in London. Now, this he said that I wanted to take the revenge for that. Okay, if you can see here, if the screen has loaded, you'll be able to see the photograph of Udham Singh, the revolutionary. So he wanted to take the revenge of the Jallianwala Bagh incident, where the common public were shot at. And further later he was caught and he was hanged for his atrocities. Okay, so this was something about the Jallianwala Bagh incident. Now the Jallianwala Bagh is in news, okay, because of Jallianwala Bagh National Memorial Bill 2019. You can have a look at that bill and try to write down what are the provisions of that bill, because the original bill said that it is talking about Indian National Congress President would be the chairperson of this committee. Now this particular name has been changed to the leader of the single opposition party in Lok Sabha. So this is something the major change, because the BJP government is there at the center today, and it said that Jallianwala Bagh is not just it is not just the Congress is fighting against that, but it is also almost all political parties are fighting against that. So that is why there was an amendment which is proposed in the bill, and also to make the trust, the Jallianwala Bagh National Memorial Trust, into an apolitical entity. That means without any political interferences. So this is the background of the Rowlatt Satyagraha and Jallianwala Bagh. Hope you now understand how both are related. Because of Jallianwala Bagh incident, the Rowlatt Satyagraha has been called off. So these two are very interrelated events. If you have any questions, let me know. Or if you are clear also, please let me know that you are clear. Clear?
Yeah,
Thank
clear,
you.
sir.
Any other things you wanted to add now?
No,
Okay,
sir.
thank you. So now, what kind of questions you can expect from your prelims point of view, from your mains point of view? From your prelims point of view, again, the chronology or the important leaders, the places which are associated, they can give 3 or 4 incidents and ask you to arrange them in the chronological order. Okay, this is the type of questions you can expect in your prelims. Maybe in the mains, you can expect the questions like what are the consequences of the Jallianwala Bagh incident, or the Hunter Commission report, or what exactly are the preventive detention laws and how they are relevant in current day. So as I told, whenever you are preparing for the history, try to correlate it with the current day. In current day today, we are having the controversial laws like UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and we also have the sedition law, section 124A of IPC, which is also becoming controversial. Okay, have a look at those acts and law, and or preventive detention, what constitution says, what the law says, what are the different committees which are there, and have a look at AFSPA, Armed Forces Special Powers Act. There is protection of PSA of Jammu Kashmir, the local law of Jammu Kashmir. All these are preventive detention laws. Have a look at them and try to correlate with the past. Okay, if you are clear, we can go to the next subtopic of today's session, that is Khilafat movement. So before that, I just wanted to see that the meeting is still going on. How much time do we have, sir? No?
Yeah, another 3 minutes, so we can just conclude here
Yeah,
and we can start.
fair enough. I'm disconnecting now.
Yeah, sure. So all participants, please join again, okay?
Okay, hi all, welcome back. So hope you are able to see the screen again. Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so how I have mentioned it in your notes. So just wanted to show you the notes, how you have to prepare, how you have to write. Let me know if you are able to see the Word document as well. So here, what is Rowlatt Satyagraha? Whatever we were discussing about the Rowlatt Act, I kept it here. What are the provisions of the Rowlatt Act? Everything I have mentioned it here. And I kept some box items whenever we are talking about the freedom fighters, so that everything related to them at one place, and you can actually update it. As I told, I'm going to give you the Word document. You can actually edit it, update it the way you like. And coming to the next topic, Jallianwala Bagh, that is the causes. Again, I divided the topic into what are the causes of Jallianwala Bagh, course of events, consequence, and important leaders in the box. That's it. So what are the events which are there in news, like Jallianwala Bagh National Memorial Amendment Bill? What is this? Maybe 3 or 4 lines about this one, nothing more than that. Now, if you prepare in this way, you are not going to miss out the questions. Okay, so as I told, the major thing you have to follow in your approach for preparation is knowing how much you should study, what not to study. Okay, so this is even more important if you are preparing a topic like history, because the syllabus is vast and you have a lot of material in the market. Okay, I don't suggest you read a lot of books. Okay, but if you make your notes, maybe within 100 pages, you are able to complete whole your history, and maybe 1 page or 2 page for each topic. Rowlatt Satyagraha, hardly 1 page. I covered within 1 page. Maybe Jallianwala Bagh, 1 page or 2 page. So in the same way, if you prepare the topics like this and see previous questions, I given the previous mains question, previous prelims question, always keep in mind that you are not deviating from your track, and you are not preparing more, not preparing less. You are preparing as much which is required for the examination. So we are here currently the advent of Gandhi, we were discussing yesterday, and today's class we were discussing about Rowlatt and Jallianwala Bagh massacre, 1919. Now some dates become very important because both happened in the month of April. The Rowlatt Satyagraha in the month of April and Jallianwala Bagh also in the month of April in the same year, 1919 only. So here where students are very much confused. So which came first, which came later? Now again I suggest that do not just mug up the dates, because it might you might actually forget. It might be quite possible that you might actually forget. But if you know that because of Rowlatt, Jallianwala Bagh incident has taken place, and because of Jallianwala Bagh, the Rowlatt Satyagraha has been suspended. Now you will not find any trouble if you are given options. Arrange these in the chronological order: Rowlatt, Jallianwala Bagh, and Government of India Act. Now you should not have any trouble in arranging because you know the story. Now if the story is in your mind, okay, you need not mug up a lot of facts, lot of figures. Okay. Now moving on to the next topic, that is Khilafat. Khilafat, Khilafat movement or Caliphate. Now what exactly is this Khilafat movement? Now this was a time when World War I was going on in the country, and just after the World War I, we know that there are two groups. On one group led by France, Britain, Japan, and USA. On the other side, there are the powers like Germany and Ottoman Empire and Russia, which has withdrawn in between. Okay, now on the Belgium and all these are on the other side, the losing side. Now the winning side of the World War I, they wanted to make the treaties which are against the losing side. Now in and around Paris, so Paris, in and around Paris, there are some places. So after these places, the treaties are named. So for example, Treaty of Versailles. Maybe you would have heard of Treaty of Versailles when you are dealing about world history. Versai Ailles, Versailles, Treaty of Versailles. In fact, this Treaty of Versailles is against Germany. In the same way, there is one more treaty which is against the Ottoman Caliphate, and this treaty is called as Treaty of Sevres, Sevres. Now, what exactly would be in the Treaty of Sevres is not clear, but there are a lot of rumors which were going on. What could be there mentioned in the Treaty of Sevres? Now, what is the problem for the Treaty of Sevres for India? The problem for this is the Khalifa, or called as Khalifa, means the head of the state. Caliphate means the head of the office. Okay, just like Sultan and Sultanate. Okay, Sultan means the person, Sultanate means the office. In the same way, Khalifa means head of the state. Caliphate means his own office in Persian. Now, this Caliphate, the Khalifa, he is not just the political head, but also he would be the religious head and the spiritual head of all the Sunni Muslims across the world. Now, because of this reason, what would happen to the fate of Khalifa was something which is a concern for almost all the Muslims across the world, from Morocco to Malaysia. Okay, almost all are Muslim countries. Hope you know that from Morocco to Malaysia, there are a lot of Islamic countries, from the western side of Africa to southeast side of Asia. Now, almost all the countries, there are agitations. There are demands against the Britain and France that do not do anything which is against the interest of the Islamic world, because he is not just political head but also spiritual head for the Sunni Muslims. Just like Dalai Lama. Hope you know Dalai Lama. Okay, Dalai Lama is not just a political authority but also a spiritual authority for a group of Buddhists. Okay, in the same way, the office of Khalifa. Now, because of that, there are movements, and that movement is called as Caliphate movement, and this Caliphate movement in India, we call it as Khilafat movement. Hope the word is clear. What exactly is that Khilafat movement? Okay. Now, this is the concerns of Indian Muslims about what would happen to the Ottoman Caliphate. Now, after in the similar lines of Treaty of Versailles, which is a humiliating treaty which is against Germany. So, the Treaty of Sevres could be a humiliating treaty against the Ottoman Caliphate. Now, because of this, the protests have started in India that we call it as Khilafat movement. Hope this is clear. Okay, because this is the way the UPSC is trying to correlate a topic in world history, a topic in India. So, what is the implication of World War I on India? Maybe if there is a question like this, you can write about. In World War I, the protests against the Treaty of Sevres in India, we call it as the Khilafat movement of 1919. Now, the important Islamic leaders such as Muhammad Ali Johar and Hakim Ajmal Khan and Hasrat Mohani, Maulana Hasrat Mohani, all these are the important top brass of the Islamic leaders in India. Now, they started the agitation in India, and the demands of them is the first demand of these people is the British Empire should not have any harsh terms on the Muslims, which would be a great insult to all the Muslims across the world. The second demand is they should not do anything to the office of Khalifa. That means the Khilafat committee has suggested that there should not be any imposing treaty or any imprisonment or any execution to be on the office of Khalifa, because the Muslims across the world would be offended because of this. Now, this Khilafat movements were going on across India, okay, within India from Kerala to Kashmir. So almost all these states, the Muslims across the states also started these agitations. Now, Gandhi wanted to take up this Khilafat movement as a part of his freedom struggle movement. Now, when Gandhi wanted to take up this Khilafat movement issue, Jinnah would oppose. Now, Jinnah himself, he was a Muslim, but he is opposing the Khilafat movement. The reason why Jinnah would oppose this one is this is a extraterritorial problem. That is, it is not a problem within India. It is a problem of Turkey. Let the people of Turkey to deal with it. Let India focus on India's struggle rather than Turkey's struggle. Okay, this is what Jinnah's idea. And also there could be other analysis or other viewpoint that this is a movement which could be taken up by Gandhi. Now, if Gandhi takes up this particular movement and becomes successful, and he has seen the success stories of Gandhi in Champaran, Ahmedabad, Kedah, as well as Rowlatt. Now, if this becomes successful, there could be a possibility that Jinnah would be sidelined in Congress. And because of all these reasons, Jinnah would completely oppose. And he will say that never mix politics with religion. Okay. Now, Jinnah in 1920s would be different in Jinnah in 1940s. This is how we have to understand the evolution of the politics in the country. Now, he also says that Congress is a political organization and Khilafat is a religious movement. Let us not try to include the religious movement into the political organization. So these are the concerns of Jinnah. But however, in the year 1919, Gandhi would finally take up that Khilafat committee's recommendation. And the Khilafat committee recommendation would be taken up by Gandhi. And this Khilafat committee movement would be merged with non-cooperation movement later, which we will discuss. Now, you might be confused why there are so many movements. One is Rowlatt movement, Rowlatt Satyagraha. On the other hand, there is Khilafat movement, there is non-cooperation movement. First, you have to understand the difference. Rowlatt Satyagraha is against the Rowlatt Act undertaken by Gandhi. Okay, it is an initiative of Gandhi, not by Congress. And later, there was the other movement called as Khilafat movement. It was not undertaken or started by Gandhi. It was undertaken by the Muslims. And later, Gandhi would take up this movement, Khilafat movement. And the third one is the non-cooperation movement. It is the first official movement launched by the Congress. Now, till that point of time, Congress would not take up the movement. If you could recollect, even the Home Rule League movement is the initiative of the individual leaders like Tilak and Annie Besant, not by Congress. Okay, Congress leaders would take up the movement, not the Congress itself. But non-cooperation movement is the first mass movement launched by Congress officially. That is why we can see a lot of movements, which would finally merge into non-cooperation movement. Okay, which we'll discuss in detail about the non-cooperation movement. But before going into this, I just wanted to give you the highlight of the Khilafat movement in the notes. So here I given the notes about the Khilafat movement. Hope you are able to see it. And what exactly is a Khilafat? Okay, maybe a one line. Khilafat movement is a pan-Islamic movement launched in different countries, including India, after World War I in defense of Turkish Khalifa and other holy places such as Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem. We hope you all know that all these places are located in the current day Saudi Arabia and Israel region, and these are the uh, the major pilgrimage places for the Sunni as well as Shia Muslims. Now, the fears of Muslims are like what would be the fate of Khalifa, maybe what would be the fate of the holy places, and what would happen if the Turkey gets captured, what would happen to all these holy places. Now, this particular movement would be having an anticlimax. Anticlimax means something completely not expected. Now, that anticlimax for this movement is the Indians in India, the Muslims in India are fighting for the Caliphate movement, whereas the uh, Muslims in Turkey would be completely against this particular caliphate. Just 1 minute, I'll be back. Just one. Hello. I'm sorry, there was a small work. Yeah. So let us come back. Like as I told, this would be having an anticlimax because the reason is that Muslims in Turkey, under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Pasha, they would be against the Turkish Caliphate. Now, why I'm saying as anticlimax, the irony is Muslims in India are fighting for the Turkish Khalifa, whereas Muslims in Turkey are against the Turkish Khalifa, and finally he will be overthrown, and Turkey would be declared as the first Islamic country to become a secular country. Now, from then on, Turkey became a secular country, and even in West Asia, in almost all the countries in West Asia, Turkey is one of the most modernized countries in the West Asia. Okay, hope this is clear. And finally, Gandhi would also withdraw the non-cooperation movement, so that we'll discuss later. So finally, this Khilafat would be merged with non-cooperation movement. So again, I gave some important leaders in the box items so that you can actually remember with the figures. So Muhammad Ali Johar, Hakim Ajmal Khan, and Hasrat Mohani. Again, I gave maybe 1 or 2 lines about the important the roles which the role played by these leaders. Okay, and how the mains question was asked. Okay, so here I given the previous main question. Hope these 3 sections are clear. What we were discussing. Any questions till now? Let me know. Rowlatt, Jallianwala Bagh, and Khilafat. Again, as I told, these 3 are very much interrelated issues. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we can go to the next topic. That is the Government of India Act 1919. Yeah,
A
please.
question, sir. Sir, Khilafat movement is a religious
correct.
movement,
Religious
right?
movement.
So Gandhi being a secular person, why would he support a religious movement?
The
Why
reason
did he
is,
do that?
see, Gandhi is not a very secular person. Like he was calling for a secular country, but Gandhi was a deeply religious man. So this is the irony of history. See, like Gandhi, he himself was a very religious man. In his personal life, he was a very religious man, but he fought for a secular country. Whereas Jinnah, he was a very secular man, but he fought for a Islamic country. Now, this is the irony of history. Now, in history, you will see a lot of contradictions like this. Now, for many scholars, so this is something which is Gandhi's idealism as well as realism. Gandhi's idealism is in India, the Muslims are minority. Because they are minority, we should take up their causes. That is what Gandhi's idealism. And Gandhi's realism is, see, getting a lot of support from the grassroots level becomes very difficult. Because for common man, either the British or Indians, if they are rulers, it does not make much difference. Now Gandhi has to project that British is something bad. Now to project something bad, religion is a very simple idea. Now this is what Jinnah would argue, that never include or never mix religion with politics. Now where Gandhi would be adamant and he wanted to take up this particular issue and he will uh, 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 try to use this religious movement into a political movement. Now Gandhi's idea of religion and politics are very much mixed. Hope I answer your question. Okay. If not, you
Yes,
can
sir.
actually let me know through the chat or let me know. Any other
Okay, sir.
questions, group? Okay, I'll take it as no. So we'll go to the next topic. That is the Government of India Act 1919. Now again, whenever you are preparing for the acts, so again the acts become very important for your prelims as well as mains. And if there are three acts which are the most important for your examination, always one question is there from these acts. They are 1909 Morley Minto Reforms, Indian Councils Act, 1919 Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms, Government of India Act, and Government of India Act 1935. So the ones which I have ticked here are the most important of these acts. Okay. So if you are making a list of acts, so how to find out which is most important and which is not? Like other ones are important for prelims. So as I told, smaller the act, only frontline question. Larger the act, a full-fledged question. Now this is the ones which I have ticked is a large full-fledged question. I think last year they asked this question. Always in the mains also you can see one question which is related to the constitutional development or acts. Okay, so they asked this question, Government of India Act 1935. So 1919 Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Or if you see the prelims previous questions, which maybe in the next class we'll see how the questions are being asked in prelims and mains. So you will see that always one act is often asked, and most of the times the students are confused because they know broadly what are there in the act, but when they are pinpointedly asked, the students are confused. And whenever you are preparing for the act, again I gave you the golden rule. So whether you are comfortable with all the acts from 1858 to 1947, this is called ground rule. In the same way, from 1773, if you could recollect, from 1773 there was Regulating Act to 1853 Charter Act. Now these are under the East India Company rule. So how to prepare for the acts? Again I gave you the thumb rule for the preparation. Make a list of all the acts. Just beside the act, are you able to identify at least 4 important salient features? If I ask you what are the 4 important salient features of Government of India Act 1858, are you able to remember and put together? If you are able to do that, you are on the right track. If not, your preparation needs to be again, you have to prepare it again for these acts. Now until you are able to make in the same way, like for example, if I ask you the 4 important features of August Offer 1940, you should be in a position to tell me 1, 2, 3, 4. If you are able to do that, you are on the right track for the preparation. If not, you have to go back and re-revise. So can anyone quickly tell me what are the important features of Government of India Act 1858? At least 1 or 2. The most important. I hope you forgot everything. Okay. So go back to your notes, the notes which I have given, the Word document, and go through what exactly is mentioned in the Government of India Act 1858, and take up this exercise maybe by the next class. So again, I'm going to ask you what are the important features, and if next class or the next coming class we are going to discuss all the prelims questions based on the acts. All acts put together we'll be discussing. Again, don't prepare acts in a compartmentalized manner. Prepare in conjunction with 1858 to here. When you are preparing 1858, all the acts should be on your fingertips from 1773 to 1853. Again, all these are very popular questions. If you see the prelims, almost every year, like at least 7 or 8 questions from modern Indian history. Of the 7 or 8 questions, so generally half of those questions are related to the constitutional development. What are the provisions of these acts? So under which act, what has been implemented? What are the background? What are the consequences? Now, if you prepare from 1773 to 1947, Indian Independence Act in this way, you have almost covered your modern Indian history. Because, for example, the 1919 Government of India Act is the background and the consequences are nothing but the events which have taken place during this time. Okay, for example, why the 1919 Government of India Act has come? To understand that, you have to understand the political landscaping in India at that point of time. In this way, you are going to cover your history as well. Okay, so again, don't prepare in isolated manner. Try to have a complete understanding of the act. Now, the 1919 Government of India Act, as I told, how to prepare the three things. What are the causes for the act? Second one, what are the provisions? And third one, what are the implications or the significance of the act? The provisions become more important for your prelims, whereas the background and the implications become more important for your mains examination. Okay. Now, this particular act is based on the committee's recommendation. That committee is called as Montagu-Chelmsford report. The committee report is based on Montagu, M-O-N-T-A-G-U, M-O-N-T-E-T-A-G-U, Montagu, and Chelmsford, C-H-E-L-M, C-H-E-L-M, yes, F-O-R-D, I think, yeah, you have the spelling here, Montagu, Chelmsford report. Based on this report, now first of all, who are Montagu and Chelmsford? Montagu was Secretary of State. Montagu was Secretary of State, whereas Chelmsford was the Viceroy and Governor General of India. Hope you recollected what is the difference between Viceroy and Governor General, and what is the Secretary of State, what is the role and responsibility of Secretary of State, from which act the separation has started. Okay, hope you recollect all. Otherwise, have a look at the previous classes. Okay, now what is the background in which the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms were started? The background was India supported the Allied powers in World War I, that they are fighting for democracy. So this act was enacted to bring some sort of democratic reforms to satisfy the people. Okay, not completely, but at least to some extent. They wanted to satisfy the people to some extent. And also, in the political history of the country, we were discussing that a lot of events were unfolding. Like there was coming up of moderates, extremists, and revolutionaries, the Home Rule League movement, and Mahatma Gandhi coming into picture, change in leadership of Congress, the 1916. Can anyone remember where is the session of Congress in 1916? Very important. Session of Congress becomes very important. That is the Lucknow session of Congress. If you could recollect, Congress has split into two political extreme parties in 1907. That is called Surat split. So some scholars say that Congress was buried in Surat, where the rebirth has taken place in Lucknow. Okay, so you can write, this was one mains question, like because after the Surat session, the Congress role was very limited. But in the 1916 Lucknow session, two important events would take place. The first important event is the extremists would be allowed back into the Congress, and next one is the Muslim League and Congress. You can see the pact which is made between the two, and because of this, the Hindu-Muslim unity was at its peak during the after the Lucknow Pact. And because of all these events which are unfolding in the country, there was no other option but for the British but to deliver a responsible government. That means that is the reason this 1919 Government of India Act or Montagu-Chelmsford reforms called for a responsible government, which is the basis for this particular act. Now, This is the background, and also we can see that the new leadership in Congress is very aggressive, unlike that of old leadership. Unlike that of old leadership like Firoz Shah Mehta or Dadabhai Naoroji, who were more moderate in their approach. The new leadership like Tilak or Ani Besant launching the Home Rule League movement, or Jinnah and Gandhi, who are also very active, and Gandhi in fact was hyperactive in the political mainstream. And because of all these events which are unfolding in the country, the British wanted to appease at least a section of Indians. So that is the reason the 1919 Government of India Act has, this is the background in which Government of India Act was enacted. Now, if you are clear about the background, we'll go into the next aspects like the provisions of the Act. Now, the provisions you should be very cautiously dealing, because the provisions would be having a huge amount of impact on our constitution, the way Indian constitution was formulated. So I hope you know that Indian constitution, 60% of Indian constitution is borrowed from 1935 Government of India Act. And the Government of India Act 1935 is not an isolated act. It would be drawing its, you can say, the features from various acts starting from 1773 Regulating Act. So as a student of history, you should be in a position to enumerate all the features from 1773 to 1919, from 1919 to 1935, 1935 to 1947, 1947 to 1948. That is Indian Independence Act to the Constitution, the formulation of Constitution. How, which provisions of the Indian Independence Act and other acts were taken into the Indian Constitution. Now, if you prepare in this way, you are not only preparing your history, but also preparing your polity. Your polity gets stronger. Okay, this is the way you have to correlate the topics between history and polity. Now, coming to the features, what exactly are the features of Government of India Act 1919? Now, I have divided the features into three parts. The first part, what are the changes which are made at the central government level? Second section, what are the changes which are made at the state level? The state, in those times, they are called as provinces. Hope you could recollect the Bengal province, the Madras province, Central province, United province. Today, what we call it as state. In those times, during the British time, they were called as provinces. So, at the central level, there are some changes. At the provinces level, there are some changes. And the third one is the other changes, or the other significant miscellaneous changes. Now, what are the changes at the union level? Now, that is what we are going to see. Now, I'll just show the Word document which I have prepared. I hope all of you are having the same Word document. If not, let us know. I'll share the latest one, because some students are having the old ones, I guess. Okay, so Government of India Act 1919. Here I given the background. Yeah, please.
Sir, this is Sai.
Yeah.
Can I have
so
the
just
new
after the
one?
class, I'll share the new document. So Srinivas sir is going to share across everyone.
Okay, sir.
Okay, no problem. So
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
if you can see the screen here, I've given the Government of India Act 1919, the background, the features, and what is the implication or significance. Okay, now in the background, maybe again write in your own words 3 or 4 points, not more than that. This is the background in which the act was formulated. And what are the provisions? The provisions become, as I told, become more important for your mains examination, sorry, prelims examination, because often the prelims examination revolve around the provisions. Now, we'll see the provisions one after the other. Again, we'll try to correlate with the current day political setup of the country, so that you will not be confused. Now, I hope many of the students have already prepared for what is Government of India Act. What are the provisions? But most of the time, they will be not having clarity. The clarity becomes more important for this exam. So we'll focus more on the clarity. So again, all the important points I made it in the notes, so you need not look up at different multiple places. And also you need not, I don't want you to spend more time in collecting the notes or making the notes, so that I'm going to give these ones. So I hope you will make the good use of the notes. So let's get started. Try to understand what exactly the features of this act. The first one, what are the changes at the union government level? That is the central government level. At the central government, for the first time, the subjects are divided into central subjects and provincial subjects. Today, we call them as 7th schedule of the constitution. I hope you remember, you completed your constitution, right? Polity and constitution. Yes or no? They have completed, but you have not completed. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes,
So,
sir. Yes, sir.
at least the syllabus is completed. Okay. Now, if you want, you can make a note of the articles and provisions which I'm saying. So, if you want to correlate, you can correlate. So, Indian constitution, I hope you all know that it is a federal constitution, but we are having the strong center. Okay, that is which is called a federation with a strong center or a unitary with a federal features. Now this is a debate. Now finally the Supreme Court said Indian constitution is a federal constitution. Now though we are calling it as a federal constitution, we are not a truly federal country like USA. US is an example of a truly federal government, whereas India, it is not a truly federal country, but it is like a Canadian model of governance, where it is partly federal. Now, this kind of federation would emerge from 1919. If you see here, for the first time, the power has been divided into central subjects and provincial subjects. That is, union subject and state subject. Now, in today's constitution, we do have Article 246. If you want, we can make a note. Article 246, and there is 7th schedule which is attached to Article 246, which is today talking about union list, state list, and concurrent list. Under this list, there are subjects. That is union subject, state subject, and concurrent subjects. For example, defense or currency, or you can say the external affairs. All these are union subjects. That is, only the union government can make the law on those subjects. And there are some areas like law and order, or health, okay, or agriculture. They're all state subjects, where only state government can make the law on state subjects. And in addition to that, there are concurrent subjects where union government as well as state government both can make the law. They are called concurrent subjects. But in 1919, there were only union subject and state subject. That's called provincial subject. There are no concurrent subject. The concept of concurrent subject would come from 1935 Government of India Act. Now, coming back. Now, this particular act also includes bicameral legislature. Now, bicameral means two houses. Bicameral legislature at the union level. Now, the same thing is followed even today. Even today, we do have two houses at the union level. The Indian Parliament has Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha as well as President of India. Now, in the same way, we are following the bicameral legislature at the union level even today. At the state level, but at the state level, it can be unicameral or bicameral, because some states, I hope you all know, some states are having bicameral legislature, whereas most of the states are having the unicameral legislature in India. But I hope you know what is unicameral and bicameral. Bicameral means having legislative assembly and
Yes.
legislative council
Yes,
also.
sir.
So only few states are having legislative council. If you do not know, try to make a list of the states which are having legislative council, like states like Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Bihar, and earlier there was Jammu Kashmir, which was having a bicameral legislature. But today, recently, the Andhra Pradesh government passed a resolution to scrap the legislative council. Jammu Kashmir, there was the division of the Jammu Kashmir into Jammu and Kashmir Union Territories of Jammu and Kashmir. The bicameral legislature was abolished. Okay. Now, coming back to the discussion, and what are the changes at the executive? Now, who is the executive at the union level today? Ministers? Yeah. So, at the
Minister.
union level, the executive today is President of India. President of India is the executive head of at the union level. And the President is the nominal head, whereas the real head is Prime Minister plus Council of Ministers. Okay. Now, in those times, in 1919 Government of India Act, the executive was called Secretary of State, who will be in London. Okay, we were discussing that Secretary of State means something like External Affairs Minister, who will be in London. Whereas in India level, he is called Governor General, and he is called Viceroy when he is looking after the princely states. Otherwise, he is called Governor General. So there is Governor General who is the executive head of the union level. Now the subjects are divided into two subjects at the union level itself. Again, it's not at the central level, the state level. The central subjects are divided into two subjects. One is called transferred, one is called reserved subjects. Transferred subjects where the ministers can pass the law, whereas on the reserved subjects only Governor General and his council can make the law. The Governor General and his executive council, which is having 6 members, and of this 3 are to be Indians. So 3 out of these executive council members are to be Indians, apart from the commander in chief. So the commander in chief would always be a British person. So this is the major changes which are made at the union level. And he could also enact a bill without the legislature consent. Today, do we have similar provision? Can anyone name? Do we have any similar provision for enacting a bill without the legislature? Can the president make a bill without any legislature support? Today we call it as ordinance. Hope you have heard the word ordinance. Article 123 for the President of India. 123, we do have the ordinance making power. Again, it is a colonial legacy that we are having the ordinance making power. And he can prevent any bill from becoming a law. Okay, today what do we call? Can anyone name? The President of India can stop any bill from becoming a law. We call it as veto power, VETO. If you could recollect, we do have, the President has got absolute veto, suspensive veto. Sir, the screen sharing is not enabled yet. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just doing. I'm just doing.
Okay, please let me know if you are able to see the screen. Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yes,
So
sir.
we were discussing about the veto powers of the president today, which are something similar, something comparable to that of the power which is given. So we can see that whatever the powers the president of India is having today, or the constitution has granted to the president, we can see something which is followed from those point of time. And there were the questions which can be asked in the house, but the governor general can disallow any question can be asked. Okay, but today the president does not have any role in such areas. Now, as we know that President of India, the president is only the nominal head. All the real powers are vested with the prime minister and the council of ministers. Now, over time, the governor general's power was one after there was other was taken away, and now today the president of India does not have any real powers. Okay, so this prevented the president from exercising the arbitrary powers. And in short, the governor general is more powerful than the legislature. This is the irony of the 1919 Government of India Act. That is, we are talking about the central level. That is, whatever the, now today we are having parliament. In parliament, we do have Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha and president. And president is not a member of parliament. I hope you all know that president is not a member of parliament. President is a part of parliament. Okay, only under his legislative capacity. Okay, not otherwise. Only under his legislative capacity is a part of parliament, not otherwise. Now, the role of President of India today is something comparable to that of Governor General, but almost all the powers were taken away one after the other. Now, coming to the legislature, what are the changes which are made? The changes which are made, for the first time, the legislature at the central level became bicameral, that is, two houses. The legislative, earlier it was called, what we call it as parliament today. Earlier it was called as Imperial Legislative Council. It was called Imperial Legislative Council. This Imperial Legislative Council has got two houses. One is called Central Legislative Assembly. Today we use the word assembly for the state level. But in those times it was called Lok Sabha. What we call today as Lok Sabha, it was called as Central Legislative Assembly. So here in brackets I have written Lok Sabha and Central Legislative Assembly. But today what is the term tenure of Lok Sabha? Can anyone say? 5 years. And members?
5 years.
5 years.
How many members are there? Maximum? Yeah, 550.
550 members.
552.
550,
okay.
sir.
552.
52.
545
52. Sir.
currently, current strength, but maximum sanction strength is 550 plus 2. 2 from Anglo-Indian community. 2 from Anglo-Indian community. Now, yeah, you have to correlate with the current things. What is the duration of Rajya Sabha today? 6
6 years.
6 years, sir, but not decided in
Yeah, see.
not mentioned in
Rajya Sabha does not
Constitution.
have a life. Rajya Sabha is a permanent body. It does not have, yeah, Rajya Sabha is a permanent body, whereas the members would be
Permanent
having a term. You should be very specific. The members of Rajya Sabha would be having a term of 6 years. Okay, members would retire, but Rajya Sabha is never dissolved.
Yes.
Okay, if I give you a statement, President dissolves Parliament, it is a wrong statement. Because President cannot dissolve Parliament, because Rajya Sabha can never be dissolved. Whereas President dissolves Lok Sabha. Lok Sabha can be dissolved. Hope this is clear. Okay, so when I say dissolved, when I say adjourned, so you should not have any doubts on this. So, for example, if I ask you a question, which body in India or which house in India can be abolished but it cannot be dissolved? It can be abolished, but it cannot be dissolved. Which house? Yeah, very good. Legislative Council. Legislative Council is a permanent body. It can be abolished. Altogether, the Legislative Council can be abolished, but it cannot be dissolved, just like Rajya Sabha. Hope this is clear. The discussion is clear. So, in those times, the Council of State was also having a term that is called 5-year term. Today also we call it as Council of States, Rajya Sabha, in brackets I mentioned it here. Now, what is the importance of this? They have extended this one. Now today the membership of Rajya Sabha 250. I hope you all know 238 plus 12. Okay, the 12 members from which sections? Can anyone name? Okay, nominated by under which category?
By president.
Yeah.
Art, literature,
Come on. Okay, not sports.
Social service.
Sports.
Not sports. It is art, literature, sciences and social service. Now these are the 4 categories the president can nominate in Rajya Sabha. Whereas in Lok Sabha, 2 members from Anglo-Indian community can be nominated. But in those times, the nomination power of Governor General was much more. Here you can see in the case of Legislative Council, Legislative Assembly, 41 members. Again, don't get confused when I say Legislative Assembly. It is not Legislative Assembly at the state level, at central level. That's why we call it as CLA, Central Legislative Assembly, which is something similar to Lok Sabha today. Now, in those times, he can nominate 41 members, whereas today, 550 plus 2, only 2 members he can nominate. Okay, but in those times, 145, in 145, 41 members are nominated by government. Here you can see the role of Governor General is much more compared to that of President today. In the same way, in the case of Rajya Sabha, today president can nominate 12 members, up to 12 members in 250 member house. But in those times, in 60 member house, around 27 members can be nominated. That means about half of them can be nominated by the Governor General. Hope you got the difference when I am comparing with this. This might be much clearer. Instead, if you prepare in this way, it might be much difficult for you. But if you are able to correlate with today's context, it might be much easier for you to correlate. Now, what would be the disadvantage with nominated members? Because nominated members are either official or non-official. Official members are civil servants. But today, can officials become nominated members of Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha? Can anyone name? Can an IAS officer become an MP? No. During his time, no. That means he has to resign. Even if a clerk has to become a member of parliament or any minister, he has to resign from his service. Then only he can contest the election. Hope that is clear. Because that is there because he has to maintain the division of powers or separation of powers between the legislature and executive. That is, members of executive can never become the part of legislature. Hope that is clear. But in those times, that separation was not there. Whereas officials are nominated by the Governor General into their course. So that is why there is no separation of power. And the non-official members, they are outsiders. Any non-official can also be nominated by the Governor General. Now, coming to the elected members. In election also there is general electorate, there is separate electorate. See, if you are able to correlate the other constitutional development. Okay, see, in 1861, councils are established. In 1892, elections were conducted for the first time. But they are only indirect election, not direct election. Direct elections were held for the first time in 1909. But separate electorates were introduced here. Hope you are getting the connection between 1861 to 1892. See, in 1858, everyone were nominated. In 1861, councils were formed for the first time. In 1892, elections were held for the first time. They are indirect election. Indirect election, just like we elect the members of Rajya Sabha today. That is, we vote for our MLAs, and MLAs in the states would vote for MP in Rajya Sabha. Okay, indirect election in 1892. In 1909, elections were held for the first time. Okay, but separate electorates were introduced. In 1919, general as well as separate electorates were introduced for the first time. Hope the connection is clear from 1858 to 1919. Now, the separate electorates, there are different provisions, and we can see that in the case of 1909 government of the Indian Councils Act 1909, Model Elementary Reforms, the separate electorates for Muslims were given and for Zamindars. But now in 1919 Government of India Act, this separate electorate was expanded to European community, to the Sikh community, as well as the Anglo-Indian community as well. For all these members, separate electorates would be mentioned. Now, what is the problem for Indians? That is, Indians if they are elected, even if they are elected to central legislature, what is the problem? First of all, the people who are voting for them, the voting is not universal adult franchise. The franchisee was narrowed. That is, not everyone can vote. Okay, today everyone above a certain age can vote. But in those times, it is not like everyone can vote. Only those people who paid the taxes, only those people who had a land revenue, only those people who had certain offices, they can vote. But at the max, the maximum amount of people voted in 1945-46 elections, and even in those times, it was only 15% of the Indians were allowed to vote for the first time. Hope this is clear. That means only few sections of the society are allowed to vote in the first case. And second one is the people who are elected through the general electorate. Only they can speak against the government. The other ones would never be speaking against the government. For example, if you are an official of the crown, you can never oppose the crown because you are a servant of the crown. Hope this is clear, because the officials can never speak. And who are nominated by the governor? Only the S-boss type of people would be nominated by the Governor General. So those people who are nominated, these people can never speak against the elected government. That means even though those people who come from See, if you can see here, only those people who are from electorate, general electorate, can speak against the elected government. The other people can never speak against the elected government. Here you can see, I have highlighted the general electorate in both. Just a minute. There's some error. Hope you are able to see it now. See the Word document, everyone? Okay. See, only there are
Yes, sir.
two sections
Yes,
of
sir.
people. Here, general electorate. I am not able to make any changes here. I think it was getting stuck. Okay, leave it like. You are able to see it, right? The general electorate. Okay, I'm not able to highlight it now. See, these are the people who can speak against the government. That is 52 out of 145 and 16 out of 60. And they are always in minority. Hope this is clear, the intention of the British. It looks like the Indians are allowed to participate. Whereas when they go to the legislature, they will find that they are always in minority. Here, out of 145 members, there are 52 members. Even if one political party would manage to win all 52 seats, these 52 members would always be in minority. Whereas these 16 members would also be in minority in the next house. That means the other members, either nominated members or separate electorate members, can bulldoze the decisions of the people who are elected through the general electorate. And first of all, the people from general electorate itself are not elected by whole of the population, but by few sections of Indian society. Hope this is clear, the intentions of the British and the actual working of the act. That is, it looks like the Indians were allowed to vote, they can vote, but when they actually contested the election, when they went into the Imperial Legislative Council, they found themselves into minority. Even Jinnah was elected under this. Later he will resign from this one against the protest against the Rowlatt Act. Hope the connection is clear. Now, coming to the other powers, the legislators were allowed to ask questions. Today also, there is a separate session allocated in Parliament that we call it as question hour, generally from 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock. And from 12 o'clock, it is called 0 hour, where the members would be giving their questions to the speaker or the chairperson of the house. So the questions of national importance, written question, unwritten question, starred question, non-star question. Hope you would have heard of all this in polity. But the background of this, asking the questions in the house, comes from here. The legislators can ask the question, but at the same time, the Governor General can disallow any question. Hope again this is clear, connection is clear. They were allowed to speak, but at any time they can be silenced by the Governor General. That means they do have right to speak, but only when the governor permits them to speak. Okay, the power is still with the Governor General. And also here they were allowed to vote on budget. Voting on budget was allowed, but only a part of budget was subject to vote. Only 25% of the budget was subject to vote. And if you could recollect our discussion in the class, we were discussing that the railway budget was separated from the union budget. Okay, based on the committee's recommendation. Can anyone recollect the committee's name? Which recommended for separation of union budget and railway budget? If anyone can recollect, I'll be very glad. Okay, it is Ackworth Committee. by Ackworth Committee, ACWORTH, Ackworth Committee. The railway budget was separated from union budget because many legislators are entering the Central Legislative Council and asking the questions. That is why they have separated the railway budget. And also we can see that the total budget which they can vote is only 25%. That is, the remaining 75% is like a black box. Even the legislators do not know where it is being spent. Okay, that is, there is no much transparency. But at the same time, the direction was started. That means the direction of making it transparent has started. Okay, and at the same time, the ministers, that is what we call it as ministers, in those times it was called Executive Council. The Executive Council of the Governor General. Today we call it as Council of Ministers. The Executive Council of Ministers, most of them, they are not from the elected persons but are from the nominated persons. Again, this is something ironical. That is, on one side you are allowing them to become the members of Legislative Council. At the same time, you are not making them the ministers. That is, they are not becoming part of executive. At the max, they are becoming the part of legislature, though in a minority. Okay, so just like even today, we can see the members of Rajya Sabha becoming the ministers. Okay, this is it allowed? Can member of Rajya Sabha become Prime Minister today? Yes, it is allowed. So in the case of Britain,
Yes, sir.
the Prime Minister has to be from House of Commons. Okay, he cannot be from House of Lords. That means he should be a popular leader. But in the case of India, we have allowed even the Prime Minister can be from Rajya Sabha. Now it is legally correct, but at the same time it is morally not correct. The reason is, for example, take the case of Manmohan Singh. Manmohan Singh was a member of Rajya Sabha. He lost the Lok Sabha elections in his constituency. Later, he was induced into Rajya Sabha, and he was made the Prime Minister. See, inducting them into the Rajya Sabha itself is something against the democratic spirit of the country. And at the same time, you are giving them the important portfolios like Prime Ministership or important portfolios. This is something which is very ironical, which is against the democracy of the country. The same thing we can see in the case of Arun Jaitley. Arun Jaitley was a member of Rajya Sabha. Smriti Irani, okay, again she was from the Rajya Sabha. So, but at the same time they were holding the important portfolios like Finance Ministry or HRD Ministry, which is something which is against the democratic spirit of the country, because on one hand we are having the elections, but people are going casting their vote, and even if they are defeated, they are coming through the backdoor entry, that is Rajya Sabha. So that is why there is a debate today, should the nomination process be ended? And there is also a debate, is Rajya Sabha really relevant in a country like India today? Because many countries have abolished their upper house. Is it really relevant? Okay, try to find out the answers for that. Okay, now maybe in your polity class you will deal more about the relevance of Rajya Sabha, why the Rajya Sabha, what are the current situations, problems with the nomination process, is it a colonial legacy or is it having any other usefulness or utility? You might discuss in your polity. So hope this is clear. What are the provisions in the central government? Just to recap, the executive would be the Governor General, and he will be having Executive Council. Governor General something like President and Prime Minister put together, and his Executive Council something to Council of Ministers. And the bicameral legislature was made, that is the lower house, what then it was called as Central Legislative Assembly, and upper house it was called Council of State, something like Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha today. Despite that general electorate was allowed, they were always in minority compared to that of nominated members and separate electorate. If you put together these two numbers, the nominated and separate electorates, they are always in majority. You can see that they are always in majority compared to that of members from general electorate. So they are just for display, not for actions. This is another controversy about this one. Any questions about the central government structure as per Government of India Act 1919? If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we can go to the next one, that is about the provincial level. What are the changes at the state level? Okay, so I'll take it as a no. We'll go to the provincial level, at the state level. Today at the state level, who is the executive? State level, come on. Yeah, governor, he is the nominal executive, and the real executive is
Governor, sir.
chief minister. Yeah, chief minister and state council of
Minister.
ministers. State
Minister.
council of
and Council
ministers.
of Ministers.
In those
And
times,
Council of
there was no
Council.
concept of chief minister. In those times, there was no concept of prime minister. Both the powers, governor as well as the chief minister, would be held by governor himself. And the most important provision of this act is diarchy at provinces. Now, this is something which is very important. Maybe you would have heard of this word many a times if you are preparing for your history class or polity class. Maybe you would have heard of the word diarchy many a times. But today we are going to go through thoroughly what exactly meant by diarchy, because this question is repeatedly asked, in mains. If you can see here, diarchy at provinces is the most important provision. Almost all the three mains question, they talked about diarchy. So I hope we'll spend some time on what exactly is diarchy and how is it going to impact the political situation of the state. Now we are talking about the provincial level. Provincial level, diarchy. The meaning diarchy means dual government. That is two levels of executive. Now, what are the two levels of executive? Now we were discussing that the subjects, all the subjects are divided into union level, that is central subjects, and provincial subjects. The provincial subjects are further divided into two subjects. Okay, that is the state level subjects are further divided into two subjects. They are called reserved subjects. They are called transferred subjects. Now, reserved subjects, that means only Governor General would be dealing with the reserved subjects along with his executive councillors. Just like at the union level, there is Governor General and his executive council. In the same way, the governor at the state, at the province, would also be having his own executive council. Now, these executive councillors are nominated, and most of them are English. Most of them are the Britishers. Now, the reserved subjects are the important subjects. If you can see here, the governor would be having dual responsibility. One set of people are called his own minister, that means his own executive council, where the members are drawn from the nominations, and the other set is from the elections, and those who are coming from the elections are mostly Indians, and these are called as ministers. Ministers are given the transfer subjects, whereas the executive councillors are given the reserved subjects. Hope this is clear. This is what we call it as diarchy. Now, what is the problem with this kind of approach? That is, if we can see here, all important portfolios like finance, very important. I hope you know that it is a mother of all ministries, where all the money would be there. Finance would be a reserved subject. Law and order, again the police, it is a father of all ministries. Okay, now again it is kept with the executive councillors. And irrigation, land revenue, all kept at executive councillors, whereas transferred subjects are given to the Indians. Transferred subjects, if you see the transferred subjects, the nature of subjects like education, local government, health, industry, religious, public works are all given to the ministers. Now, what is the problem with this kind of approach is those people who are elected and who become the ministers, they got only responsibility, because almost all these are dependent on this. If you see the nature, for example, if you want to spend on education, you need finances, but finance is not in their hand. Finance is in the hand of executive councillors. Hope this is clear. Local government, again it is a responsibility, whereas law and order is a power they kept for themselves, responsibility they kept to the Indians. Now it looks like Indians were made ministers. A lot of ministers would be there at the state level as well, but the reality is all the power is controlled by the Britishers. Is this clear? The approach, this is what we call it as diarchy. That is, they have made the Indians as ministers. They have made the voting, they have given the voting rights, but at the same time all important portfolios are kept and reserved, and the people who are here can make laws on here. That is, reserved subjects, the councillors can make law on transferred subjects, but not vice versa. That is, the ministers cannot make any law on the reserved subjects. That is why they are called reserved subjects. Hope the wordings and everything is clear. They are very obvious, but what is diarchy you should understand. For example, if a particular minister wants to spend on education, he does not get finances from the ministry because they are coming under the executive councillors. If a particular person wanted to spend on wanted to do something on agriculture, agriculture is here whereas irrigation is here, industry is here whereas power is here, education is here whereas the finance is here. Now I hope you understood the background of this. That means Indians are given the responsibility whereas the Britishers kept all the power for themselves. This is what we call it as diarchy at provinces. Now this diarchy at provinces would be scrapped in the Government of India Act. Now you need not remember all the subjects. Here I have given like 6 or 7 subjects. Just by looking at the nature, you should be in a position to tell me whether it is a reserved subject or whether it is a transferred subject. Now I am going to ask you a question. You have to quickly reply me under which subject under which list that particular subject would come. Defense. If you say defense, under which subject? Transferred or reserved?
Reserved.
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 Currency?
Reserved.
Reserved.
Reserved. Okay. See what I am asking here is
Reserved, sir.
currency, defense. They are not provincial subjects. Okay, they are all union level subjects. Hope this is clear. So I asked this deliberately because you might be confused. Because do not think that all the powers are given to the reserved subjects. The reason is we are having 2 lists. Okay, if you can see here, I'm making a flow chart. 2 lists. On one side, we are having union level subjects, that is the central subjects. On one side, we are having provincial subjects. In provincial, we are having 2 lists. One is reserved list. One is the transferred list. Compared to this, the reserved are powerful. But compared to provincial and central, the central is always powerful. This is not under the reserved subject, but they are the central subjects. Hope this is clear. That's why I deliberately asked this question. Okay, do not get confused that all powers are given to the provinces. So some powers are given to the provinces, but within the provinces, there are 2 categories. This is by Governor General. See, this is by Governor and his executive councillors. This is by governors and by ministers. This is mostly Indians. This is mostly British. Hope this is clear. Or any questions on diarchy? Now this is what we call it as diarchy at provinces. At state level, you have 2 bosses. That is, one level we are having ministers. On one level, we are having executive councillors. Ministers are popularly elected by the people, but they do not have any powers. They only have responsibility. Okay, if people are asking questions, they have to be answerable. But all powers are vested with the reserved category, that is executive councillors. Now, if you are clear about this division, you should be able to answer the questions which are asked in the mains. Okay, any questions on this? What is diarchy? What is diarchy at provinces? Okay, if not, we will move to the next one. At the legislature again, women were allowed to vote, again subject to lot of conditions. Then communal electorates, separate electorates, caused for communal tensions as well as class tensions. Then size of provincial legislatures increased, but governor's assent is required to pass any bill. That means even if ministers wanted to pass any bill, he has a veto power. Today, does the governors have any veto powers? Today, governors, do they have any veto powers? Okay, it is not called veto power. A governor may reserve bill for president's reconsideration. That is called Article 200. If you want, you can write Article 200. Okay, something which is a colonial legacy.
Yes.
Any bill he can reserve, but governor does not have veto power. Only president has got veto power. He has got absolute veto, suspensive veto. Okay, he has got pocket veto, but there is no qualified veto in India. Okay. So he can issue ordinances, Article 213. If you want, you can write it down. This is Article 200 today. With the any bill can be reserved for the reconsideration of president by the governor. Okay. Then he can issue the ordinance. Governors can issue ordinance, that is called Article 213. Whereas president's power to issue ordinance is under Article 123. Okay. So these are the major changes
123.
at the union level. The changes, bicameral legislature, governor, though there is a this one. So hope you will be able to write 200 words only at the central level changes and 200 words only at the provincial level changes. Okay. Now in addition to this, there are some other provisions in the 1919 Government of India Act. We'll have a look. There was establishment of India Council at London. The India Council, where 3 Indians would be inducted. If you could recollect, 1909 Government of India Act, the India Council House at London was established. Can anyone remember the Indians who became the members of India Council House for the first time? Okay, I'm going to ask you another question. Who was the first Indian to become part of Governor General's Executive Council? Who was? Satyendranath Sinha. Very good. SP Sinha. Okay. Satyendranath Sinha. Okay. SN Sinha. Then the Indians to become part of Indian Council. There are 2 gentlemen, if you could recollect. We discussed in 1909 Government Indian Councils Act. K.C. Gupta and Syed Hussain Bilgrami. There are 2 persons. Again, I've given it all the details in your notes for the Indians, because these kind of questions become very popular for your prelims exam, factual questions. Okay. Now, Indian Councils Act, 3 Indian members were nominated into the council. Find out the names of the 3 Indians. Okay, because if the examiner is very strict, okay, you can get the questions like who are the 3 Indians who were inducted into the council for the first time. Okay, and in addition to this, there are other provisions like High Commissioner the office of High Commissioner was established in London. Then this act would be reviewed for 10 years, because if you could recollect, 1909, after 1909, 1919 Government of India Act, and after 10 years, 1929, there has to be another act. For that reason, there is a commission called Simon Commission, which would come to review the working of 1919 Government of India Act. And also this act has called for establishment of Public Service Commission, which later became UPSC. Okay, so these are all the provisions. All the provisions I listed out. Okay, but the way the prelims questions are asked, they might be a bit twisted. So spend some time in previous prelims question so that you'll get a good knowledge. Any questions till now? Okay, if not, we'll go to the evaluation of this act. Again, significance. I do not want you to write the story. So just write positives, write negatives. Positives, very obvious. Diarchy introduced the concept of responsible government. Again, some kind of responsible government was introduced. The British always said that we are going to give you a responsible government. Okay, but the Tilak, Gandhi opposed. So what Britishers have said to Tilak is, if Britishers leave India, then India would be anarchy. That is, people would be fighting among themselves. So for example, a lot of movements were going on. For example, Ambedkar was asking for Dalitistan. Okay, Sikhs were asking for Khalistan, and Jinnah was asking for Pakistan, and all the groups which in India would be fighting with each other for power. So we are able to provide some kind of power consolidation. Now Gandhi in reply said, even if it is anarchy, if leaving India would lead to anarchy, I would risk it. I would take that risk. There is no, even Tilak has said that there is self-government is always preferred over a responsible government. That is our own government, whether good or bad, it is always preferred to a responsible government. That is, self-government is always our outcome. But the British claim that we are going to give you a responsible government. Now it introduced the concept of federalism, but with a federal unitary bias. Till today, we are having the similar structure, whereas provinces are having more powers than 1919, but at the same time, the Indian states do not have as much power in reality or in even on paper. You can see that the states are at the mercy of the union government. Okay, then it increased the participation of Indians into administration, because at least some fields, so at provincial level or at the union level, people started entering into the administration. For the first time, elections were known to the people, and people it made people to be conscious about the politics. And also Indian women were given the right to vote for the first time. So all these are some good points about this one. At the same time, there are some limitations. As we told, the elected people were having less powers than the non-elected people. Then diarchy was also not practical, because elected ones got limited powers, whereas nominated ones got more powers. And also the communal politics were on rise. Separate electorate, class or communal representation further widened the gulf. This Indian nationalists call it as divide and rule policy of British. And not all Indians could vote. The franchise was very limited. Okay, and it did not never extended to the common man until independence. And despite all these changes, the governor generals and governors still had lot of powers, and they can literally bulldoze the legislatures at the central level as well as the state level. And allocation of seats was not based on population, but based on importance in the eyes of British. Now this is something all the positives and negatives, and if you still get any positives or negatives, you can add up here. Hope the format of the notes would be very helpful for you, because instead of writing the whole story, I try to create all this in one section. But again, don't spend more time in making the notes, because I have already made it. Try to spend time in understanding from different sources. So I hope we covered in detail about the Government of India Act 1919, and any question would be related to these background features or significance. But because this is a competitive exam, the questions can be a bit difficult or a bit twisted. Okay, hope everyone got connected again. Okay, so I'm talking about like the type of questions which can be asked in prelims and mains. Very important for prelims, because a lot of provisions are there in this act, and maybe it might be clear for you now, but once you prepare all these acts, still you should be in a position to remember all the provisions of 1919 Montagu Chelmsford Reforms. Just to quickly recap, can you recollect the important provisions of Government of India Act today? What we discussed? The important. Can anyone recollect or wanted to recap whatever we discussed today in this act? See, the two important things: one, bicameralism at the center; second one, diarchy at provinces. These are the two most important things, and on these two important, you can expect a full-fledged question: bicameral legislature at central and diarchy at provincial level. Whereas the other ones, the Indian Council or the other provisions, they are more important for your prelims. So within this one, you can expect the statement type question in your prelims. Consider the following statements related to diarchy. Consider the following statement related to bicameralism. Okay, so I hope you got an idea, understanding about the topics, the three topics or the topics which we are discussing today: Rowlatt Satyagraha, Jallianwala Bagh, Khilafat, and Government of India Act. Now we can see in 1919 a lot of events have occurred simultaneously. Okay, Rowlatt, Jallianwala Bagh, Khilafat, and Government of India Act. So this particular year becomes even more important for your examination. So if you write from 1818 to 1947, some years become important. Okay, and this is one of the most important years. If I select maybe top 5 years important for your exam, this is one of those years. Okay, hope you got an understanding about this one. Go back, read about this from your standard textbook and update your notes. If you don't have any questions, we can conclude, or maybe 1 minute if you have any questions. Okay, I hope you are clear about the topics. So go through these and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Hello. Yeah, tomorrow, not for you, sir, actually for the students. Tomorrow there won't be any class because madam is having some issue. And the other classes will schedule and we'll let you know geography. And Bharat sir, he will continue on again Saturday and Sunday. Okay?
It's okay,
I will
sir.
post a message. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And Tuesday will be geography class. Tuesday to Thursday, Friday, sir.
Okay, sir.
Thank
Okay,
you,
sir.
and have a nice day.
Thank you, sir.